On this Tuesday night,
Canada Revenue Agency filed a lawsuit against your name.
Hundreds have been scammed, millions of dollars stolen. Now, after a CBC News investigation, authorities are taking action.
We are not going to stop. We're going to continue our efforts jointly, collaboratively, until we take you down.
Sending a message, but will it be enough to protect Canadians?
Why do you want to continue?
As the migrant caravan heads north, the National is on the ground in Mexico. Why they aren't deterred by the politics or the U.S. troops waiting for them at the border.
And President Trump's visit brings more division to Pittsburgh.
Maybe we shouldn't be looking to Washington to be consoled. Maybe the problem is we need to be looking to one another.
As a city and a country rocked so viscerally by violence tries to heal, has the conversation in the U.S. shifted? This is The National.
For years, Canadians have been harassed by threatening phone calls and voice messages warning of dire legal consequences over unpaid taxes. It's all part of a big scam. Chances are you or people you know have received one of these.
Hello, this call is from the Tax Department of Canada Revenue Agency. There is a case, a lawsuit, that is getting filed under your name. The moment you receive this message, I need you to get back to me. Now, if I don't hear a call from you, we will have to issue an arrest warrant under your name.
Grating, isn't it? All too often, that message or ones just like it have worked, robbing Canadians of at least $10 million in the past 5 years. But after CBC aired its exclusive marketplace investigation, there's been action. The RCMP has put pressure on Indian authorities who, in turn, have been cracking down. But how close are they to ending the scam for good? David Common brings us up to speed.
All right, they're going in. They're nervous, but they're going in.
For years, Indian call centers at the forefront of the massive scam have been largely untouched. But now a day of reckoning has arrived. Indian television shows some of the dozens arrested in multiple raids near Delhi, and police say more busts are coming.
We, law enforcement in Canada, international law enforcement as well, we are not going to stop. We're going to continue our efforts jointly, collaboratively, until we take you down.
The raids come just weeks after a CBC Marketplace investigation into some of the call centers behind that CRA scam, a story the RCMP now acknowledges helped push the issue forward.
It drew more public awareness and pressure onto Canadian law enforcement, as well as the Government of Canada. We're serious about combating this issue.
In the days after our report, the RCMP, FBI, and others provided additional info to India, prompting police there to act. Inside, investigators have found lists of Canadian victims, at least 600 of them. And now officers in Canada are about to call those people.
Is there any prospect that the people, the Canadian victims who you now know, are going to get their money back?
Hopefully we can get some of those funds back. All those efforts, we will try our best to do it, but I can't make any guarantees on that.
The arrests send a message in India, but there are believed to be dozens of such centers, many operating secretly underground.
So, David, does this mean that other call centers are really just going to fill in that void?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, people got these scamming calls today. The raids targeted 2 centers, many others still operating, and they're getting smarter. They move frequently to evade detection. They change their phone numbers often. And those phone numbers often make them look like they're calling from the legitimate Canada Revenue Agency. Harder for people on the receiving end to kind of figure out what's going on. Ultimately, these scam centers make money. And until that stops, they won't.
Right, so people are still going to get calls. Again, what's the best advice if you hear that call?
If you have someone from the Canada Revenue Agency or purportedly that calling you, be suspicious immediately. If they threaten you with arrest, hang up, get rid of them, it's not real. Generally speaking, the Canada Revenue Agency does not call. Sometimes they do, but they will never threaten you.
Okay, David Common, thanks very much.
We have another CBC News exclusive coming up for you tonight on The National. Evan Dyer learns that the Canadian Border Services Agency is planning to ramp up deportations of thousands of migrants whose asylum claims were denied.
Plus, as we go in depth on this planet on the move, our Susan Ormiston takes us to that moving caravan of migrants in Mexico. Why all those people are determined to make it to the U.S. border. Just ahead.
But first, while Pittsburgh's Jewish community started holding funerals today, hundreds took to the streets to tell the president he isn't welcome.
President Trump, you are not welcome in Pittsburgh until you stop targeting and endangering all minorities.
Protesters were waiting for the president, angry with his talk, his tone, his persistent language they argue has fueled hate. The CBC's Paul Hunter is in Pittsburgh, watching and listening to that visit, and the mourners still reeling.
All day long in Pittsburgh, the mourning continued outside the synagogue. Quiet, respectful, sorrowful visits, leaving behind fresh flowers and anguish. And as the day grew, so too the number of those turning out, still trying to understand any of it. And on this day, tucked in among the Stars of David and the flowers, a message for the president, soon to be visiting this place, echoing the words from some of those who came today to grieve.
He doesn't think he is the person responsible for all of the hate in the world right now, but I think he has a big part of it.
You link the rhetoric with the rise in intolerance?
Absolutely.
Trump's divisive language led many in Pittsburgh, including the city's mayor, to urge Trump to stay home.
And at this point in time,
But even in Pittsburgh, Trump's supporters were having none of it.
I heard today that he shouldn't be coming here. Well, if he didn't come here, they'd say the man is an anti-Semite. He doesn't have any compassion. So the man can't win no matter what he does.
It was into all of that that Trump's motorcade pulled up this afternoon, with the president underlining he was here to pay his respects. He, Melania Trump, and others went briefly inside the building, though not into the room where the attack happened. That's still a crime scene. Shortly after, they spent some time out on the sidewalk, considering that ad hoc memorial and the 11 people killed on Saturday. Later, they visited a nearby hospital to meet with survivors. Throughout the visit, demonstrators a block away could be heard chanting, "Words have meaning." All of it leaving some in this neighborhood frustrated that somehow everyone's missed the point.
We're looking to these figures at the national level to tell us how to feel and what to do, whereas we need to be looking to one another.
And Paul joins us now from outside the Tree of Life synagogue. And Paul, let's talk about the potential impact of this violence and the national debate that's going on, the impact it may have on the midterms a week away.
Yeah, look, I mean, this event has really put the spotlight on the language of Donald Trump and the potential effect it can have. Certainly the people of Pittsburgh have shown their serious distaste for that, but this is also being watched very carefully across the country, and the degree to which midterm elections are a referendum on the president, this can't help. That said, Donald Trump now embarks on a string of rallies in the lead up to the midterm elections. It'll be worth watching them, not least simply to see the kind of language he now chooses to use to energize his supporters. We'll see.
Paul Hunter in Pittsburgh again tonight. And as the city grieves, the first victims of Saturday's shooting were laid to rest today. There were long lines and synagogues overflowed with mourners looking to say goodbye to 4 victims. Dr. Jerry Rabinowitz, the 66-year-old, was remembered as a hero who rushed to help the injured. He had an infectious laugh and a signature bow tie, and to his patients, he was more than just a doctor.
There are just not enough words. We treasured that doctor. We bragged about being his patients.
Daniel Stein, the 71-year-old, a well-known volunteer in the community, who was most proud of his new role as a grandfather. Cecil and David Rosenthal, the brothers, were familiar faces of the Tree of Life, always greeting congregants with a smile.
And he was always there greeting you when you walked in the door. And his brother was always there too.
They had the same spirit. They looked out for each other. They were each other's best friend.
They were buried side by side the same way they spent much of their life. Among the hundreds who paid their respects, several Pittsburgh Steelers. At tonight's Pittsburgh Penguins game, another show of support, the home team welcoming the city's police chief and 2 officers who were wounded in Saturday's attack.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The players wore Stronger Than Hate patches on their jerseys. Those jerseys will be signed and auctioned off, with the proceeds going to the Jewish Federation of Greater Pittsburgh and a fund for the wounded officers.
Now, before Trump left for Pittsburgh, he made comments about immigration that have sparked controversy again. It seems linked to that caravan of asylum seekers in Mexico, slowly making their way now to the U.S. border. With the midterms just a week away, Trump is keen to show voters just how far he'll go to keep them at bay. And the stakes, they're getting higher. Trump wants to put an end to birthright citizenship. That means that children born on U.S. soil to non-citizens or undocumented immigrants would no longer get automatic citizenship, even though it's a right under the Constitution. Here's what he said in an interview recorded yesterday.
You can definitely do it with an act of Congress, but now they're saying I can do it just with an executive order. Now, how ridiculous. We're the only country in the world where a person comes in, has a baby, and the baby is essentially a citizen of the United States for 85 years with all of those benefits. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
In fact, there are other countries that have it. Canada has a similar birthright law. It's not clear Trump has the authority to even make this change unilaterally. And today, Republican House Speaker Paul Ryan said he does not. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham announced he will introduce legislation along those lines. And this is playing out even as thousands of U.S. troops head for the Mexican border on Trump's order. The caravan of migrants traveling mainly by foot is weeks away from that border, but they are key players in the political drama of those midterm elections. So here's a closer look at who they are and whether Trump's military plan will deter them. Our senior correspondent, Susan Ormiston, is in the southwestern province of Oaxaca.
We caught up with the caravan in Juchitán in southern Mexico at the bus station. In the early afternoon, they stopped here after a 50-kilometer walk from the previous town and bedded down for the night. There are thousands of people here, families and single people. And after 2 weeks and numerous warnings from Mexican officials and the U.S. president of military action, the group doesn't seem to be splintering or losing steam. In fact, it seems ever more organized. Everyone here is tired. Their trek ends in the midday heat because they've already traveled 7 to 8 hours, starting much before dawn. After the last 2 weeks, shoes have long worn out. Legs too, especially for the elderly. Now to reach the U.S. border is another 1,300 kilometers at least. It seems insurmountable, even if the U.S. military wasn't waiting for them. This is an invasion, according to President Trump. All these families with toddlers who won't remember the Exodus and still need entertaining. Their parents will never forget it. You missed them? Merlin Ordonez and Melvin Suazo and their 2 children began back in Honduras 16 days ago, leaving behind scarce work and menacing gangs who threatened to take the husband's wages. Did they steal from you? Yes, they stole shoes and clothes from their homes, she says. They're both exhausted. The President of the United States doesn't want the caravan to come to the U.S. He's putting military on the border. Does that concern you? Yeah, I'm worried, but we're going to get to the border, and another opportunity will come along. Why do you want to continue? It's always the kids. The caravan is slipping into a pattern. Now, when it arrives, the towns are waiting with food, water, and medicine. A state official dodged our questions on politics, instead told us they're just doing basic humanitarian work for fellow Central Americans. Like Fatima Pinto, who's 23 and 19 weeks pregnant with her 3rd child. Nurses tell her after so much walking with her family, the new baby's already turned. But given the option to go back,
No queremos regresarnos, no.
They don't want to come back.
Ever? No. So far, we haven't come across reports of violence on the road. There is a hypersensitivity to any image of a reckless mob. A scuffle on Saturday was quickly doused by people in the caravan, not police. But even while they get spruced up for the next leg of this journey, no one is confident they know how it may end. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Juchitán, Mexico.
So that's just Susan's first report, but as she continues to travel with the caravan, we'll be sharing more of her photos, videos, and stories all over our social media. Check out more tonight on our Facebook and Instagram pages, CBC The National. Canada, of course, has its own issues with borders. The spike in arrivals by asylum seekers who cross into this country at irregular places, hoping to be granted refugee status for nearly 2 years. That's been creating a backlog in the immigration system. Now, CBC News has obtained exclusive details on how the government is addressing the issue by ramping up the rate of deportation for those whose claims have been rejected. The CBC's Evan Dyer looks at the politics and who will be affected.
I fear being deported, and that is why I'm coming up to speak, because the situation in my country is precarious. My family is in danger.
Ntebo Awungafak's refugee claim in Canada has been rejected, not because adjudicators don't believe he'd be in danger back in Cameroon, but because they say he was part of a movement that advocated using force to overthrow the government, which he denies.
If I am going back now with the warrant of arrest that I have back home, I will not be alive.
Awungafak now finds himself among the 18,000 people who are awaiting removal.
Stop. You're entering Canada illegally.
Record numbers of asylum claimants have reached Canada these past few years, many walking across the border in Quebec. At the same time, deportations have been going down from about 15,000 in an average year to about half that. But a CBSA memo this month obtained by CBC tells staff to prepare for a new target of 10,000 removals a year. Today, Public Safety Minister Ralph Goodale said the government ordered the change.
We indicated that we have to pick up the pace in terms of that activity. We provided some extra resources for CBSA to do the work that is necessary.
For months, Conservative Michelle Rempel has pressured the government on this issue, calling the influx of asylum seekers a crisis. 3 Liberal cabinet ministers were dispatched to tell the public it was not a crisis. Today, Rempel says increasing deportations doesn't solve the issue of illegal border crossers.
I would like to see us focus less on having to expend resources to mitigate this situation and just see that demand decrease on the onset.
Refugee advocates say it makes sense that more arrivals mean more removals. But they say agents trying to meet deportation quotas usually target the easiest cases, not the dangerous criminals or people trying to go underground.
So it can distort where the priorities go in terms of removals, and maybe leads to priorities being different from what most Canadians would consider should be the top priorities.
The Liberals know they have a problem with the migrant issue, and with the election just a year away, it seems they're moving to fix it. Evan Dyer, CBC News, Ottawa.
On to some other stories we're following tonight on The National. In Indonesia, the grim recovery of wreckage from the Lion air crash continues. The country has now ordered inspections of all commercial 737 MAX 8 planes, but it stopped short of grounding them. Still not known why this jet went down just 13 minutes after takeoff on Sunday. It had only been in service for 2 months. Divers continue to search for the voice and data recorders. It is known as the Canal City, but 75% of Venice is underwater tonight, including the famous St. Mark's Square. For 3 days now, heavy rain has drenched parts of Italy, sending water rushing into streets and shops. 11 deaths have been recorded in other parts of the country, many of those killed by falling trees.
Today, I am recommending to committee that we suspend our work and wind up our bid to host the 2026 Winter Games.
Calgary being urged to pull out of bidding for the Olympics. That's coming from the city's Olympic Assessment Committee. $3 billion in funding is still needed. Now, Ottawa has promised half of that, but it's up to the province and the city to provide the rest. Council will vote tomorrow on whether to pursue or cancel the bid.
Still ahead on The National. After a week of violence and troubling rhetoric in the United States, we go in depth with our political insiders.
Plus, startling new numbers from the World Wildlife Fund, a bleak report on dwindling species populations, but it's not too late to turn it around.
Plus, how long should women wait between pregnancies?
A family that might be considering a second pregnancy about 6 or 9 months after delivery of the first, it might be worth waiting that extra 3 to 6 months to lower risk.
New findings to share with you tonight on family planning. A Canadian study says women don't need to wait as long after giving birth to become pregnant again. The findings are particularly relevant for Canadian women since many are having children much later in life. Christine Barak looks at why researchers say the shorter gap between pregnancies is just as safe.
When Meghan Markle's pregnancy made headlines, so too did her age. 37 and pregnant has some wondering if this royal baby will be an only child. Many couples end up asking the same question. How long should we wait to have another?
I would like a second one down the road and maybe not wait too long, but he's a handful.
To lower the health risks for mother and baby, the World Health Organization recommends waiting 2 years or at least 18 months. But Canadian researchers are now saying if the clock is ticking, you may not have to hold off that long.
Based on our studies, it would be worthwhile to wait until at least 12 months.
Canadian researchers looked at nearly 150,000 births. They found there are risks to getting pregnant too soon. For women over 35 who conceived another baby 6 months later, 6 out of every 1,000 pregnancies had severe complications, including death. For those who waited a year, that number dropped to just under 3. And younger women who became pregnant again 6 months later more than doubled their risk of premature labor.
A family that might be considering a second pregnancy about 6 or 9 months after delivery of the first, it might be worth waiting that extra 3 to 6 months to lower risks.
We do know that there are other risks associated with pregnancy.
This family doctor says the study will prompt questions from patients, but the risks remain small.
At the end of the day, women and their partners make decisions about when and whether to get pregnant based on a whole lot of factors, not just medical factors.
Along with the health risks of having another baby, most families need to balance careers, finances, and childcare.
That we haven't even considered the burden of the next one.
Burdens the royal family may not be thinking about. Christine Barak, CBC News, Toronto.
Still ahead on The National, a warning from the World Wildlife Fund. There is an alarming decrease in the number of animals. What can still be done to stop the destruction?
And in our moment, a call for unity and a plea to move away from politics. Paul Hunter meets a Pittsburgh resident and Tree of Life congregant with a message for her country.
It's impossible for us to process what's happening, but anti-Semitism is part of being Jewish, unfortunately, right? It's the oldest hate in the world. Maybe America's just becoming like everywhere else, which is sad.
There's only 1 week to go before the American midterm elections.
There's only 1 week left until Election Day. I can't believe it.
There are just 7 days until the midterm election.
America is divided.
America is on edge.
The intensity of the political drama is overshadowed by the sadness of the attempted postal bombings and the deadly mass shooting at a synagogue in Pittsburgh.
But this is a time for us to come together as a nation.
The events of the last week are disturbing and heartbreaking.
The mood of America is angry.
And one of fear.
The events of the last week were shocking and frightening and show that there's a real need to put civility back into politics.
But a lot will be clear in just a very short time.
My advice to voters is to actually vote. I did today.
And to make sure you take someone with you to the polls.
My advice to candidates is to not leave anything on the field.
Don't let these weapons of mass distractions take you off your game.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Brown James, and I'm a proud Democrat.
I'm Jay Shabria, Republican strategist.
I'm Patty Solis Doyle. I'm a Democratic strategist.
My name is David Frum. I've been involved in Republican politics all my adult life.
So thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us again. You know, with 1 week to go, I really didn't expect the tone to be what it is right now. And I know you're all on different sides of the political spectrum, but you're all Americans. And the violence of the last couple weeks, you know, the pipe bombs, especially the murders at the synagogue in Pittsburgh, your country's been through a lot. As your neighbors, you know, we sincerely feel for you. And it makes talking about the midterms a little uncomfortable. And so I guess to start off, I'm wondering to what extent all this has changed the political conversation there. David?
I think it's driven, especially the murders in the synagogue, have driven a concern about the gun issue that has been, I think, a sleeper issue, especially for a lot of the women voters who are already very concerned about President Trump. And I think it's raised the intensity and moral feeling behind this election. Something seems very wrong in the country, and these terrible events underscore it. There has to, one distinction I think needs to be drawn between the pipe bombing and the synagogue murders. The pipe bomber really does seem to have been quite directly inspired by President Trump. He was a person who was not political before 2016, was politicized by the Trump campaign, and his targets were people who had been singled out by name by President Trump for attack. The synagogue shooter seems to have been responding much more to general background noises of hatred and anti-Semitism than to any specific incitement.
Stephanie, you know, because you run a political action committee and you're endorsing several candidates, I'm wondering what has changed in style or substance for them coming out of this?
You know, sadly, I think that we continue to see the same uncivility in our political discourse, especially from Republicans, but also, to me, a little bit too much silence from Democrats. The last week was stressful, it was hurtful. I mean, there's so many Americans who continue to be concerned about how they live their everyday lives, especially candidates, who many of them are now beefing up their security even more than they have before. And so I think, you know, unfortunately, while we saw people grieve and while we saw politicians and candidates take a pause to commemorate the victims and talk about how they would ramp down some of the viciousness that we've seen in our political discourse, it doesn't seem to have lasted longer than a week. And it seems as if it's almost business as usual. And to a certain degree, I understand, you know, we have candidates who are continuing to run their races, who are looking forward to the next 7 days being over. But I really hope that we will see a real shift in how we talk about issues that unify us and that divide us, and understand that we're all Americans and we really need to come together in this time right now.
Jay, do you buy that in terms of shifts in the language around campaigning with the Republicans?
Well, I don't know that things are going to really shift that much. I think we as a society have become desensitized to these types of tragedies. So candidates right now, as they're going through their final elections exercises, they're trying to find the right words and trying to find the right tone, trying to find the right balance. But then it is business as usual, as Stephanie said, because at the end of the day, we have an election that's coming up next Tuesday. And one of the great things about our democracy is that no matter what happens, we still go to the polls and vote. And there's a lot of efficacy to that. So I don't know that much is going to change from this, but these are just horrible events.
Okay, so they are. We have heard your president refer to these midterms in some ways as being about the Caravan, you know, this group of thousands of people who are still arguably weeks away from being anywhere near the U.S. border. Patty, I'm wondering how this is landing with the Democrats. I have this impression that they sort of see this as just a craven political move.
Yeah, the president has chosen to close on the Caravan for the midterm elections. And he's done it because, you know, it worked for him in the past. That's how he closed his message in the 2016 race, and he was successful, and he's hoping to do it again this time around. But the things that he's offering up to the American people are pure political stunts. First of all, sending 5,200 troops to the border, as you mentioned. The Caravan is still 1,000 miles away, nowhere near the border yet. It doesn't pose a threat to national security. And the Caravan is comprised of primarily women and children seeking, you know, asylum. They're fleeing danger, they're fleeing poverty, they're fleeing, they're in fear for their lives, and they're seeking asylum. They really don't pose a threat to national security either. And then today, in an interview with Axios, he said that he is looking at eliminating the birthright citizenship through executive order. Well, he just can't do that. It is constitutional, and he single-handedly cannot undo the Constitution. So these things are really political stunts, and he's just looking through his barrel of weapons of mass distraction is what he's doing to change the subject from what has been a horrific, sad week.
David, do you think the Democrats lose something, though, by dismissing this as political stunts, or Stephanie said staying silent on some issues?
I think they really do. I would agree that, look, there is a lot of stunt to what the president is doing with the Caravan. October, in addition to being the month of these terrible atrocities, and let's not forget the killing of those 2 older black people in the parking lot of a Kentucky supermarket by a white supremacist who made it very clear that he specifically targeted them because of their race. In fact, he spared a white person by said whites don't kill whites. So it's been a sad week. It's also been the worst month in the financial markets since 2009. But the Caravan is a real issue. 2018 is seeing illegal immigration running at the same pace as it ran in the quite high year of 2016. And what people from Central America who want to move to the United States have figured out is if you bring a minor child with you, you will be able to make an asylum claim. The irony with President Trump trying to make an issue of it is he has done nothing to address this problem. What will happen is these people will arrive at the border, and there'll be soldiers there, and then they will set foot on American soil, arrive at a checkpoint, and say, I'd like to make an asylum claim. And then, under the law that President Trump has not changed, they will have to be admitted into the United States and then released into the interior of the country, pending the adjudication of their claim. And when their claim comes up, they will never show up again. And that is a problem that was true under President Obama. It's a problem that continues under Donald Trump. And we're seeing more and more of this illegal entry through the use of asylum claims. It's not the country's most important problem, but it's a real thing. And we have seen Democrats being driven by their opposition to Donald Trump to a very radical position on immigration, where they're arriving at a point where enforcing the border at all is something that they now regard as completely morally unacceptable. That's a bad place from a policy point of view. It's also not great politics.
Okay, so I don't know if you know this, but recently in Canada, we've seen a rise in the use of terms like fake news, lamestream media, some shouts of lock her up, referring to some Canadian politicians here. And the worry, of course, is about the nasty political rhetoric, swelling north. And I wonder, with the benefit of hindsight, is there something you think Canadians in politics and the media can do to just keep the political conversations constructive and civil? Stephanie, let's start with you.
I think it's really important for us to make sure that that we hold media accountable, that we hold politicians accountable, to say, look, report on real issues that are impacting Americans. Don't give credence to small issues or stories that may seem entertaining, but in reality are distracting voters from what's really important. And we have to call people to the carpet on these issues to make sure that we're getting the facts that we deserve.
Patty, do you think there was a moment you can point to when the discourse in the United States took a downward turn that you regret really wasn't stopped in its tracks?
Well, I think there were two. First of all, in 2016, the moment that Donald Trump set foot on the political stage as a candidate, he came down that escalator in Trump Tower, and in his announcement speech proclaimed that Mexicans were rapists and criminals. And at that point, for the most part, the political intelligentsia said, this guy is a political joke. He's not going anywhere. Let's not make much of this. The second moment, I think, that really spoke to me in that race was the moment that Marco Rubio decided to get into the gutter with Donald Trump and making reference to his small hands. And that's when sort of mainstream politicians and the formidable candidates decided that they were going to get in the mud, in the gutter with Donald Trump. And what we've learned now is that no one wins on that platform with Donald Trump. He is the best at that, and it's not a successful way to go at him.
Jay, I'm listening to this, and I completely hear you, Patty, but I'm also wondering if Republicans are saying, why did Hillary Clinton take the bait and refer to them as deplorables?
Oh, Hillary Clinton made a huge mistake that day, right? I mean, look, we can go back and we can look at all the mistakes candidates make. I was there for a lot of those debates, and it was very difficult. It's almost like you're a boxer, and all of a sudden, for the first time, you see a left-handed boxer, and you just don't know what to do, and you're shadow boxing. And Democrats continue to make the same mistake. And look, the Caravan is one of them too. We talked about it a little earlier, and our panelists are right. The Caravan represents something bigger. It represents this this need in this country to say there's something not fair about the way immigration is done. It hasn't been done for a long time. And what they see in Donald Trump is someone that's saying, they may not agree with the tactics, they may not agree with the rhetoric, but they say, well, at least he's doing something. So the average American voter says, okay, well, there's a guy that's doing something. I don't know that's going to work, but no one else has tried it. No one else has tried to do anything that's real, and nothing stuck. So that he's going to get a ton of credit from there, for his actions, from independents, from Democrats, from conservative Democrats, and it's going to bode well for him in this midterm election, because right now, in this midterm election, Donald Trump is not as toxic as we once thought he might be. Democrats may still win the House back, but it's not going to be by the margins that we once thought it could be. And that's a very interesting phenomenon to me.
Okay, David, on this point, one last thought to you on this point. Constructively for Canadians, is there anything you can advise? We're heading into an election year fairly soon.
Yeah, there really is, and here's what I would say. Those of us of a certain age, those of us who care about politics a lot, when we say the media, we mean the CBC, we mean newspapers, we mean institutions that exist, that think of news provision as their business. By far the most important media company in the world is Facebook. Number 2, YouTube. WhatsApp has now emerged as number 3. That's the ecosystem in which people who are much more lightly connected to the political system are getting disinformation, false information, and aggressively deceptive information. Look, we all have criticisms about what we see from news gathering organizations, but if you're focused on that, you're focused on the wrong thing, because those are the people with antibodies. The information sources that are deceiving the people with weaker antibodies are on Facebook and YouTube.
Okay, thanks everyone. Good point. Listen, 1 week tonight, Stephanie, you'll be with your candidate Andrew Gillum in Florida. The rest of you lucky ducks will be right here. I'm not telling you where I'm going. Moderator's privilege, but we'll see you next week. So now you're just about ready to make sense of the midterms. Well, maybe. We'll take you through it all 1 week tonight. Our special coverage begins next Tuesday evening on CBC News Network starting at 8 p.m. And we'll continue to bring you the in-depth coverage of the elections leading up to the big day by taking you through the stories and people who will shape the United States for years to come. Tomorrow, Stephen D'Souza looks at one of the closest races that has been fraught with accusations of voter suppression.
Activists are suing Georgia's Republican Secretary of State, calling what's happening now a return to the black voter suppression tactics of the Jim Crow South.
You know, what it looked like was a poll tax where people had to pay to go vote. It looked like being forced to recite the preamble of the Constitution.
Marcia Appling Nunez was missing an A in one database, so that put her on the pending list. She tried 45 times to re-register using the state's website. You heard that right, 45 times.
And I thought, oh my God, this is something you read about that happens in other places, other states even.
Well, this is what happened when the Liberals attempted to replace the chair of the parliamentary NATO group. Conservative staffers and MPs singing to disrupt the meeting, and parliamentary security brought in to settle things down. The government pushed out Leona Olislev. She recently left the Liberals and crossed the floor to become a Conservative. In the end, a current Liberal was appointed. First, it was just a wheel stuck, then the entire vehicle swallowed by a sinkhole in Toronto this morning. A water main burst flooding the street. When a supervisor with the city's transit agency went to check, the car got stuck. He was able to get out safely before this happened. After almost 10 years, NASA's first planet-hunting spacecraft has gone dark. The Kepler Space Telescope is 150 kilometers from Earth with an empty fuel tank. It will remain forever in orbit around the sun. Kepler discovered more than 2,500 planets outside our solar system, including ones that theoretically could harbor life. From rainforest canopies to swamps, African savannas to deserts, the World Wildlife Fund has some unsettling news. 60% of wild animals, from fish to birds to mammals, have vanished since 1970. It is planet-wide, but South and Central America have been hardest hit, largely due to the destruction of habitat. It's just as bad in the water. Populations in freshwater ecosystems are down more than 80%. Scientists are calling this a new mass extinction. As Salima Shibji tells us, the losses are happening here, too.
At this hospital, turtles are the patients, relying on care from experts like Donnell Gasparini.
So this turtle was hit by a car, and so you can see she's got quite a bit of damage here. It's a fracture.
Serious injuries and ones she sees often. Turtles are vulnerable in a changing world dominated by humans.
They're losing their habitat, and then habitats that used to be continuous, used to all be one, are now having roads that go right through them. So they're trying to use the landscape in the same way that they have for years and years, and there's new obstacles in their way.
Roads and urban sprawl. That's why all 8 of Canada's freshwater turtle species are at risk of disappearing. Just some of the many wild animals experts are worried about as an increasing number of the world's wildlife vanishes. Also at risk, barren ground caribou in the north, the right whale on Canada's east coast, and southern resident killer whales to the west, down to just 74. Add that to what's happening in other parts of the world, and it's a severe portrait.
These are the types of declines that really only happen during massive extinction rates. So I think this is very troubling and a wake-up call.
Canada has signed on to a global convention to protect 17% of its land for the primary purpose of nature conservation. But it's an uphill road.
We've got provinces like Alberta and British Columbia, which are doing really well. On the other end of the spectrum, we've got some provinces that still have a lot to do in terms of meeting their protected areas goals. So PEI is at the end of the list there and is only at about 3% protection.
Back at the hospital, Gasparini feels like the report is a blow, but a necessary one.
The more people that know about it, the more people that can care about it and who can work in their own way, in their own lifestyle, in their home and work environments to make change.
Just as she's doing, one turtle at a time. Salima Shibji, CBC News, Toronto.
The moment is next. We will take you back to Pittsburgh, where our Paul Hunter met a woman with an emotional plea for her country. But first, in case you missed it.
A predator in every sense of the word.
Irish-American gangster James Whitey Bulger is dead. The former head of Boston's Winter Hill Gang was found lifeless today at the Hazleton Penitentiary in West Virginia. Bulger's rule of Boston's crime scene casts a large shadow in the American imagination. In books, documentaries, and movies like Black Mass starring Johnny Depp.
Just saying. Got me a 9-year stretch in Leavenworth.
And The Departed with Jack Nicholson.
This ain't reality TV!
He had been an FBI informant for decades. That legal cover allowed Bulger to indulge in racketeering, loan sharking, extortion, drug dealing, and especially murder. After the FBI relationship ended, he fled in 1994, traveling the world in disguise with surprising ease.
Standing face to face with him, I had no idea.
He was finally captured 7 years ago and sentenced to life in prison 2 years later. And in the end, it seems the 89-year-old died as he lived in violence. Whitey Bulger's death is being investigated as a homicide.
Let's take you back to Pittsburgh now. It has been 3 days since a gunman stormed a synagogue and opened fire, killing 11 people. The pain there clearly is palpable. As Donald Trump visited the city today to pay tribute to the victims, protesters took to the streets to denounce hate and demand that the president do the same. Earlier in the program, Paul Hunter introduced us all to a woman who grew up in the community, and he asked how she feels about the situation, and her response was just so powerful. It's our moment of the day.
With all due respect to you, I don't want to talk about the president today. I want to talk about the people who passed away. There will be time for us to talk about politics. There will be time for us to blame. There will be time for us to analyze all of this. We lost so many members of our community, and I want us to think about them today. I want to think about the families that lost loved ones. I want us to mourn for them. I want us to be there for those people. We can think about the president. There will be plenty of time for us to talk about politics. We are a country, and this is a time where we need to be united. And we need to think about the things that unite us. And if politics isn't one of those things that unites us right now, then maybe we could skip it for a moment and think about our community. This is the synagogue where I grew up. I had my bat mitzvah here. This is my neighborhood. This is my family. We're going to talk about politics. We're going to blame. Of course we will. We're going to try to find solutions, and maybe we'll try to find easy ones, but there aren't any. So we have to come together.
Interesting, you know, such an eloquent woman. She is a political science professor, and one of our producers is saying that she tweeted this evening that last night as I was beginning a seminar here in Pittsburgh, I asked my students if they wanted to discuss the events. One of my students from China asked, "Why do you have this anti-Semitism?" It was the first time I stood before a class and had no answer.
You know, she wonders what the legacy of the shooting will be, and I just thought of, you know, her eloquence and passion, but we've heard that eloquence and passion after Sandy Hook, after Charlotte, after Orlando, after Aurora, and I wonder what the lasting impact of those shootings have been, and I have this sinking feeling that not anywhere near as much as we'd like.
Yeah, and what struck me about that was no desire to look for blame, right? Just a moment to take time to think about the people that lost their lives and the people that were injured. And sometimes the media goes and tries to look for blame and point fingers, and that's clearly not what that community needs or wants right now. That's the National for October 30th. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Yeah.